These three disturbing road trip horror stories are inspired by real events. First, a father sacrifices himself to the freezing ice to save his family, vanishing forever into the white void. Next, a woman survives a terrifying cliff plunge, enduring 9 days of broken bone agony alone at the ocean's edge. And finally, a flat tire in the killing heat seals a family's fate. Make sure you watch until the very end, because it wasn't until 11 years later that a hiker wandering way off trail stumbled onto the shocking truth of where they had been the entire time. A Christmas shortcut into the Utah wilderness became an 11-day siege of ice and starvation, ending in a rescue haunted by a father's chilling disappearance. That shortcut began as a simple, calculated risk in the mind of 35-year-old Adam. It was December 23, 2004. The goal was simple: get his family to their holiday destination by Christmas Eve. In the aging Dodge Magnum station wagon, the atmosphere was one of restless anticipation. His wife, 34-year-old Melissa, sat in the passenger seat, managing the maps and the snacks in the back. 5-year-old Jacob was lost in his own world. And the quiet, steady breathing of 1-year-old baby Aaron was a rhythmic, peaceful sound. Adam had a schedule. He had a sense of direction. What he didn't have was a true respect for the high desert winter of Utah's Markagunt Plateau. The turnoff from the main highway was marked only by a sign that looked ready to fall over: Panguitch Peak Service Road. The pavement vanished almost instantly, chewed up and spit out, replaced by untreated gravel. Then the blizzard didn't arrive. It ambushed them. It was not a gradual dusting. It was a sudden, violent, and complete curtain of white. The world outside the windows disappeared. Adam fought the wheel, but the Magnum's tires found no grip. The car slid, a slow, sickening motion, off the gravel path. There was a dull, heavy thud and a crunching sound as the car's undercarriage buried itself in a deep, immovable snowdrift. The wheels spun, whining uselessly, and then the engine choked, coughed, and died. The silence that followed was the first true monster. It was not just quiet. It was a heavy, complete absence of sound, a void that swallowed the memory of the engine, the radio, and the road the trap was set. Adam stared at the wrinkled road map on the dash, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. He repeated a phrase that would become a desperate mantra for hours. "It's a service road. Someone will come out here for a service eventually." He was clinging to a lie, and they all knew it. The snow stopped falling and just hung in the air, a blinding white fog that sealed their world shut. The initial panic, that sickening crunch of metal on ice, was replaced by a deep, systematic erosion of hope. The engine never started again. The remaining gasoline was useless. The sheer, unrelenting, freezing air became a living, intelligent entity. It was a presence that pressed against the glass and seeped through the thin door seals, a constant, probing cold that was actively waiting to consume them. They were beyond the reach of any radio signal, utterly and completely isolated. The only sound from the outside was the wind. It was not a whistle, it was a howl, a predatory animal sound that scraped across the empty mesa. When the howling stopped, the silence that returned was even heavier, more absolute. By the third night, the car's heat was a distant memory. The cold was a physical pain, a biting, relentless ache in their bones. They began the slow, deliberate destruction of their own shelter to survive. They burned the paper first, the owner's manuals, the wrinkled maps, magazines, and finally, Jacob's children's books. The family watched as the bright, colorful pages curled into a momentary, pathetic flame in a small metal canister. The brief heat was a necessary, heartbreaking evil. Next, Adam had to fight their own vehicle. With a crowbar, he battled the frozen bolts to get the passenger side spare tire inside. The sound was a sharp, metallic screech and thud that echoed in the dead quiet cabin. The thick rubber, smelling faintly of old oil and road grit, burned with a black, acrid chemical stench. The smoke was a foul, gagging thing, filling the small space and stinging their eyes, but it bought them a few more hours of life. They burned pieces of clothing, anything that would catch a flame. The family dynamic dissolved, reduced to its most primal functions. Melissa and Adam found themselves arguing, not with anger, but in low, desperate, exhausted whispers over whose turn it was to hold baby Aaron. They understood a terrible, simple truth. Constant physical contact, skin to skin, was the only remaining way to keep the infant's core temperature stable. The entire focus of their lives was reduced to this terrifying, vital proximity. The psychological toll was immense. 5-year-old Jacob, old enough to know what stuck meant, stopped asking the normal, innocent questions. He no longer asked when they were leaving or if he could have a snack. He simply moved to a profound, still stare out the frost-caked window. His eyes were fixed on the endless, hostile white. He was watching his safe, predictable world become a tomb. His sudden, heavy silence was more chilling to Adam and Melissa than any childish panic could have been. This methodical depletion of resources, of hope, of life itself, continued for over a week. Every minute was a step deeper into a shared, frozen helplessness. Their attempts to signal for help were useless. A small mirror flashed at a sun that seemed to have no warmth. Their calls for rescue were met only with the mocking howl of the wind outside. It was now January 2nd, 2005. They had been trapped for 11 days. They were starving, the hunger a hollow, constant ache. They were severely dehydrated, their lips cracked, their throats raw. The car was stripped bare. The internal temperature of the car, a thick frost coating the inside of the windows, was barely above freezing. Adam looked at Melissa. Her focus was completely, terrifyingly singular. In the frozen silence, she was bent over the baby, listening. The only sound in the car was the faint, wet hiss sigh of Aaron's breathing against her chest. Adam knew his own reserves were completely gone. He knew, with a certainty that was colder than the air, that if rescue didn't arrive today, they would all die tonight. The realization snapped through his exhausted mind. His planned shortcut, his moment of prideful navigation, had become the actual problem. He was no longer a provider. He was a liability. He had to act. His movements were choppy, clumsy from the cold, but deliberate. He found a pen, his frozen fingers struggling to grip it. His hand was shaking as he wrote a note. "I have to find the highway." He knew the words were a flimsy excuse for a death sentence. He placed the note next to the baby. He slipped his wedding ring from his own finger and, with a final desperate gesture, slid it onto Melissa's. He grabbed a broken stick he had found, a useless, fragile tool. He opened the door. The sound was a sudden, violent whoosh as the outside world rushed in, a frigid, painful gasp of air that stole the last of their warmth. He stepped out into the blinding white. Melissa watched his shadow, the dark, familiar outline of her husband, swallowed instantly by the thick, falling snow and the hostile white of the forest. One moment he was there, a solid presence, and the next, there was only a great, terrible, soundless void. She wanted to scream, to call him back from his march toward the inevitable, but the cold had frozen the words in her throat. She could only sit there, holding her sons, staring at the empty, impossible trail where he had just vanished. 2 days later, on January 4th, the miracle they had waited for arrived. It was not a truck on the service road. It was a sound from the sky, a deep mechanical chopping that vibrated the very air. A private search helicopter, running a last hopeless pass, spotted the faint blackened scar of the burned tire against the snow. Melissa, Jacob, and Aaron were found alive. They were weak, frostbitten, but they had survived. Melissa's first ragged question, gasped through cracked lips to the rescuers, was for her husband. The search for Adam shifted instantly. Teams on the ground used the fragments of the burnt road map he had left behind as markers, following the faint trail of his final hope down the mountain. But the immense, unforgiving terrain, the heavy snowfall, and the proximity to the rushing, icy rivers swallowed all traces of him. The massive national search continued for weeks, but Adam was never located. His body was never recovered. The family was saved, but the story's problem was not resolved. The mother and children were alive, but one man traded his body to the abyss for their chance at life. The immediate threat was gone, but the feeling of dread remained, a permanent scar. The true horror of the Black Mesa incident is the unanswerable, chilling possibility that somewhere in the vast, silent, white expanse of the high Utah desert, Adam is still out there. His end was never confirmed, and the story of the father who walked into the cold remains forever, chillingly, incomplete. How many times do we trust a shortcut over our own instincts, and how often is a familiar-looking path merely a disguise for an unforgiving landscape? Highway 1, up on the Lost Coast, is a bad place to make a mistake. You get these long, empty stretches north of Big Sur where the road is just a ribbon of pavement. On one side, a rock wall. On the other side, a straight drop. There's no shoulder. There's no guardrail. There's just the road, and then there's nothing but air. It's the kind of place that's beautiful in pictures, but when you're on it, you pay attention. June 1st, 2015. A perfect, clear day. 20-year-old Tatum was driving that road. She was in her Toyota Highlander, and it was packed solid with everything she owned. She was moving her life from Modesto up to a new town in Oregon. She was doing everything right. She had the windows down, music playing. She was just driving, living her life. But that road, it doesn't care who you are. It doesn't care about your plans. She saw a small animal, something dark, just a flash across the pavement, right in front of her. She did what any of us would do. She reacted. A simple, instant jerk of the wheel to the left. The front tires caught the gravel on the tiny sliver of an edge, and that was it. The car didn't roll, it didn't spin out. It just left. It was gone. 1 second she was on pavement. The next, she was weightless, looking at a postcard blue ocean rushing up to meet her. The Highlander plunged 250 feet, straight down the sheer face of that cliff. People who've been in bad wrecks talk about the sound. This wasn't a crash. This was a pulverizing, ripping, tearing sound. It was the sound of steel and plastic being shredded by solid, unmoving rock, a sound that doesn't belong in the world. Then silence. Just a high, thin ringing in the ears. Tatum woke up. She was inside the ruined shell of her car. The first thing she noticed wasn't the pain. It was the smell. Gasoline, hot and sharp, burning her nose. Burnt metal and salt. A heavy, wet rock and salt smell that was so thick she could taste it. She was alive. But the world was wrong. It was a blur. She tried to move her left side. Nothing. Just a grinding, raw ache that took her breath away. It felt like the whole side of her body was full of broken glass. The report, the one they wrote later, laid it all out. Broken ribs, a shattered collarbone, a collapsed lung. But the real problem was inside her head, a relentless pounding pressure. It was a brain hemorrhage, just getting started. She didn't just break her body down there. She had fractured her mind too. She was at the bottom of the world, a tiny rocky beach, barely big enough for the mangled car. The cliff rose up behind her like a solid, uncaring wall. The waves rushed in close, too close. She could hear them making a wet hissing sound, dragging the sharp pebbles back out to sea. This was her new home. It was day one. High above her, the world kept going. She could hear it, the distinct whine of car tires on pavement. Trucks too, a lower rumble. They were right there, 250 feet. That's it. A 25-second walk if you could walk it. She was invisible to them, and they were invisible to her. She spent the first 3 days fighting. The pain was awful, a sharp white fire every time she breathed. But she pushed past it. She dragged her body, bit by bit, out of the car. She climbed onto a pile of the car's wreckage, a piece of the roof. She waved a scrap of her shirt, something bright. She used her voice. The first time it was a solid, panicked shriek. She timed it, waiting for the sound of an approaching car. "Help! Down here!" She screamed for her life. The sound of the car just got louder, passed, and then faded. Gone. She tried again. She heard a different sound, a motorcycle. She screamed again, a raw, two-word bellow. The bike sped past, its sound vanishing. And again. By day 4, her voice was gone. It was just a thin, rasping whisper. She'd open her mouth, push with her chest, and all that came out was a puff of air. The cars kept passing. She heard music from one, a convertible. She heard a family laughing. The sound of their tires was a constant, agonizing reminder of how close she was, and how far. She was screaming for her life, but the wind and the highway just swallowed the sound. She was completely, totally unheard. The helplessness was absolute. Pain is one thing. You can try to block it out. Thirst is different. Thirst is a fire, an unrelenting, dry, acidic burn in the back of her throat that never left. It was all she could think about. She found an answer. She had to crawl back inside the wreck, ripping her hands on torn metal to find it. A radiator hose, a thick, greasy black piece of rubber. It was a tool, it was a straw, it was a lifeline. She looked at the cliff wall. It was dark, covered in shadows, and it was damp. It was coated in wet green moss. This became her job. This became her life. T. Tatum had to drag her broken body inch by inch across the sharp rocks. Her knees, her good elbow. She'd get to the cliff face. She'd press that rubber hose against the damp moss and she'd suck. She'd suck as hard as she could, her lungs aching, her head pounding. It was a slow, exhausting, painstaking process. For just a few drops. The taste was bad, earthy, like dirt and rock and a faint hint of oil. But it was water. It was life. This routine was the anchor of her existence. It was also a heavy, dark ritual. It reminded her, every single time, what she had become. She wasn't a person anymore. She wasn't Tatum. She was just a creature, a thing, clinging to a rock, sucking moisture from a cliff to get to the next hour. By day 7, the hemorrhage in her brain was getting worse. The line between what was real and what was in her head started to go. The physical world was sharp. The jagged rocks that cut her, the broken glass, the smell of salt and decay. That was all real. But her mind started to play tricks. She would see her mother clear as day, standing on the edge of the cliff right where the road was, just looking down, her face blank. Tatum would blink hard, and it was just rock again. She would hear a voice, a clear, deep voice calling her name. It wasn't coming from the highway, it was coming from the ocean. It would say her name, Tatum, just once. Then nothing but the waves. She saw the animal, the same dark shape that had caused the crash. She saw it sitting on a rock, just watching her. And then came the other thing, a constant prickling sensation on the back of her neck, the feeling of being watched. It had nothing to do with the cars. It had nothing to do with the hikers she'd been screaming for. This was different. This felt close. The air felt heavy. The sound of the waves felt wrong, unnatural. The sand on her skin felt cold and clammy, and every touch felt like an invasion. She was completely alone. But she did not feel alone. The absolute crushing solitude was the real monster. It was day 9. Tatum was slipping. That dry, awful flavor of fear and weakness was always in her mouth. She was lying next to the wreckage, barely moving. She was at the bottom of the abyss. She was done. She had given up. And then she heard it. She almost missed it. She thought it was her mind, playing another trick. It wasn't the whine of the highway. It wasn't the hiss of the tide. It was a new sound, one that hadn't existed in her world for 9 days. Human voices. 2 hikers, Sierra and Trevor. They were traversing the cliff edge, way up top. They weren't looking for her. They weren't looking for anything. They just happened to see something, an anomaly, a single tiny thread of the car's metal, the only thing not covered by rock or shadow. It was glinting in the sun, one piece of chrome. If they had been 1 foot to the left, if the light had been different, if they had been talking to each other, they would have walked right past. But they saw it. They stopped, they spotted the wreckage. Then they spotted her. After 9 days of being the only person in the world, the sound of those 2 ordinary people was a shock. Tatum was so weak, she wasn't sure they were real. Then they called down. It was a sudden, violent pull back to the world of the living. The rescue was slow. It was complex. It took hours. They had to lift her out of that hole. The pain of being moved was something she'd never forget. She was rushed to a hospital. They finally took a look at the full damage, the broken bones, the collapsed lung, the brain hemorrhage, everything. But it was the quote from the deputy chief, a man named Ward, that really puts a pin in this thing. He looked at the pictures. He looked at the 250-foot drop. He wasn't trying to be dramatic. He was just stating a fact. Most people, Ward said, would not survive those conditions for 9 days. He wasn't just talking. He was stating a cold, hard fact. A fall of 250 feet isn't something you survive. It's a death sentence. That's it. Medical experts have a rule of thumb for this. They figure a fall of just 90 or 100 feet, about 8 stories high, is 100% fatal. Tatum fell 2.5 times that. What she survived wasn't just a miracle. It was, by the numbers, impossible. And she fell off a road that's built to kill. People call the Pacific Coast Highway a beautiful death trap. They're not wrong. In one recent year, that highway had 367 crashes, more than 80% of those left someone injured. And those are just the ones they count. On average, 14 people die on it every year. They even have a nickname for parts of it, Bloody Alley. That's the part that gets you. We hear about these stories, the ones like Tatum's, or that Tesla that went off a cliff, and we call them absolute miracles. And they are the rescue crews, the veterans who have to go down those cliffs all the time. They're the first to say it. But here's the thing they know better than anyone. These stories are the exception. Most of the time, when a call like that comes in, they aren't going down for a rescue. They're going down for a body recovery. So you hear a story like this, and you think about survival. But that's the wrong way to look at it. The real story of that road isn't about the one who lives. It's about all the others who don't. It's about how easy it is to make one tiny mistake, to jerk the wheel, and to just vanish. That's the truth that sticks with you. The escape wasn't an ending. It was a scar. It was the 1 in a billion chance that just proves the rule. And the rule is simple. The road is always waiting, and the cliff doesn't care who you are. A Swedish family of 4 walked into Big Bend National Park, right into 120-degree heat, and disappeared. They were gone for 11 years. All of it started with a single flat tire. That's the part that gets you. The desert is a big, empty place that does not care about you, and it doesn't forgive a single mistake, no matter how small. It was July 1998. This family, Fredrik, his wife Josephine, and their 2 kids, flew in from Sweden. They wanted to see the real America, the Wild West. They rented a big, tough-looking sport utility vehicle, thinking it could handle anything. They loaded up their kids, Nicholas, who was 11, and little Magdalene, just 5 years old. They drove straight into that Texas heat, into a part of the desert that looks more like the surface of Mars than anything on Earth. They were after the beauty, the big, wide-open spaces you see in movies. But what they found was something else. They found an emptiness that just stares back at you. They were deep in the park, miles from any paved road, way out on a remote dirt track. That's when the truck gave a heavy, ugly lurch. Fredrik hit the brakes and the engine cut out. The sudden stop was bad, but the quiet that came after was worse. It was the kind of silence that rings in your ears, a total absence of sound. Fredrik opened his door and the sound of the click from the handle seemed way too loud. He stepped out. The light was a physical thing, like a weight on his head. It was over 120 degrees in the air, but the ground itself was hotter, probably pushing 130. It was a dry, baking heat that pulls the moisture right out of your body. He walked to the back of the truck. He already knew. Rear tire, driver's side, flat. A long, nasty gash in the rubber. He could hear the last bit of air hissing out of it, a sound like a snake giving a final warning. He looked at the empty spot in the cargo bay where the spare tire was supposed to be. Then he remembered. The kid at the rental counter in the city. "Sorry, sir. The spare for this one is on back order, but you'll be on the main roads, you'll be fine." Another small mistake. They were all starting to stack up. Fredrik kicked the flat tire, and a puff of hot dust came up. He let out a low, rasping curse. Josephine got out, holding the water. They had a few of those plastic bottles you buy at a gas station. A handful, maybe 6 or 7. They drank half of it right there, in the first 5 minutes, standing in the thin shadow of the truck. The kids looked small and pale. They knew something was wrong. This was the moment, the choice. Do they sit and wait? Wait for another car? A park ranger? On this road, in this heat, they might wait for days. They'd be cooked alive in that truck long before the water ran out. Or do they walk? In that kind of heat, your brain doesn't work right. You can't think logically. The sun bakes the common sense right out of you. The metal of the truck was already too hot to touch. The air above the hood was shimmering, making the whole world look like it was underwater. Fredrik made the call. They couldn't wait. They had to walk. That was mistake number 2, a fatal one. He grabbed the empty water containers. Maybe he thought he'd fill them up somewhere. Or maybe it was just something to hold on to, a small piece of a plan that wasn't a plan at all. They set off down the dirt track. It was simple, just a straight road of baked earth and gravel. It looked like it had to lead somewhere. They figured 5 miles, maybe 6, to the paved road, 5 miles to another person, a phone, a bottle of water. The silence was the real enemy. It wasn't just quiet. It was a vacuum. No birds singing, no bugs, no wind. Not even the sound of a distant highway. The only thing they could hear was the scratch, scratch of their own sandals on the gritty ground, and the quick, shallow sound of their own breathing. It was a dry, hot sound. After the first hour, the sun had already done its work. Their mouths were dry, not just thirsty, but feeling like they were full of sand. Niklas, the 11-year-old, kept stopping. He'd turn and look back at the truck. It was just a tiny, shiny object in the distance, looking like a puddle of water, a false promise. Magdalene, the 5-year-old, was the first to really struggle. Her little legs just weren't made for this. She started to cry, but the tears were barely there. She was too dry. Josephine picked her up, slinging the girl onto her hip. But the weight, a 40-pound kid, felt like a ton of bricks, a crushing, damp burden. They were still moving, but it wasn't walking anymore. It was a shuffle, a heavy-footed, desperate march. The only shade they had was the tiny shadow their own bodies cast on the ground. They tried to talk, to keep their spirits up. But the words were thick. They felt like chewing on cotton. Every word they spoke felt like it was wasting the last bit of water in their bodies. Around the 3-mile mark, it all changed. This wasn't a walk to find help. This was just survival. The sun was an animal. It wasn't just warming them. It was hunting them. It was cooking them from the inside out. They were tired in a way they had never been before. A deep, bone-weary exhaustion. Every nerve in their bodies was screaming to just stop. Josephine felt the muscles in her neck tighten up. Her vision was starting to get blurry at the edges, with little black spots dancing in front of her. She stopped and put Magdalene down. The girl didn't complain. She didn't cry. She just sagged onto the hot, gritty ground, her head down. They all sat. For a minute. They just sat on the side of that empty road and looked at the wide, empty sky. It was a pale, washed-out blue, and it looked hard, like a piece of metal. Frederick knew. In that moment, he knew he had made a terrible, irreversible mistake. But that's the thing about pride. Or maybe it was just the heat stroke setting in. He couldn't make himself turn back. The truck was miles away. The path ahead was unknown, but the path behind was certain death. So they kept going forward. They walked for another hour, maybe 2. Time didn't mean anything out there. The road veered off to the left, but Frederick saw a gap in the rocks, a little canyon. He thought it was a shortcut. This was the final mistake. It wasn't a shortcut, it was a trap. It led them 5 miles deeper into the unforgiving landscape, away from the road, away from any chance of being found. The end came quietly. There was no screaming, no panic. It was just a slow, agonizing surrender. Nicholas, the boy, was the first to notice. He realized his parents weren't talking anymore, not even to encourage him. He turned. His father was on his knees, a few yards back. His face was turned up toward the sun, his eyes wide. His breath was coming in short, sharp bursts. A terrible, rattling sound. His mother was curled up against a rock, sheltering Magdalene with her own body, trying to block the sun's relentless eye. But the sun was everywhere. The last thing Nicholas knew was the dryness. His throat felt like it was closing up. He tasted something thick and bitter in his mouth. Fear. He sat down and closed his eyes. The absolute silence of the desert finally moved in. filling up his head. The desert had won. Days later, the rental company reported the SUV overdue. The Park Service started a search. It took them weeks to even find the abandoned truck with the flat tire. They found the empty water bottles nearby, but they didn't find the family. Search teams on foot, in helicopters. They covered hundreds of square miles. But the desert had just folded the Swedish tourists into its vast empty spaces. 11 years passed. The case went cold. It became a ghost story, a warning for the rangers. Then, in 2009, a hiker, a guy who liked to go way off trail, stumbled onto something. He was in that same remote canyon, 5 miles from where the truck was abandoned. It wasn't clothes. It wasn't a wallet. It was them. The remains of Frederick, Josephine, Nicholas, and Magdalene. They were all found together. A small final huddle of bones under the open sky. The story became a scar on the park. It proved that one simple choice, to leave the only safety you have, was a death warrant. The incident made the park finally put up better warning signs, telling people about the dangers of the heat. But those signs don't change the truth. How many other remote roads have you driven down? How many little red warning lights on your dash have you decided to ignore, just for a few more miles? That simple feeling of safety, the assumption that you're in control, that is exactly the first thing the real horror takes away from you.